Ooh. Sparkling mango ginger with cayenne pepper. Cayenne zing. Who puts cayenne pepper in a drink? Pretty nice. Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. And we are going to go to someone asking me the other day if I could show some images. I think they're asking me about what the Zaporizhia reservoir now looked like. And next day, suddenly there were images that came out and people were talking about it. I was like, oh, that's timely. Anyway, so whoever it was, here is what the Zaporizhia reservoir looks like after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. It's interesting, you can see some of these tributaries where there's basically it's the end of summer, so there's not a lot of water anyway. But that's kind of dried up somewhat as the water level is dropped, and therefore the water level would have risen up to sort of back here. So this is now all greenery. There are reports of people growing sort of potato crops in certain areas and probably other crops, as this is, I guess, fertile land. I don't know if that's chalk. Not quite so white. But anyway, that's what it looks like in one place. And as we go through this, I presume that's the Hadar nuclear power plant. And of course, the Ukrainians had an attack across here that was repelled in November last year. This is really heavily fortified, but it makes you realize, actually, when you take the water away, it kind of makes you realize how close that is as well. But that's probably a pretty difficult place. You know, when you've got all these waterways, that's very difficult to get equipment across, right? So you're not going to plan anything there. But actually, when you look over here, I presume this is kind of Kamyanska here, where the Ukrainians have control of the north and Russians in the south, and the Ukrainians are moving south there. But actually, I wonder whether they can try. I mean, they must have thought about this, and if they're not doing it, it means it's probably not tenable. Could be that the earth here has a crust that may seem very robust when you walk on it, but put a 70-ton tank on it, and it might be a different situation. So it might not be practical to attack across this area. But you can imagine it would otherwise be, well, it works both ways. So there isn't a kind of bocage, the hedgerows, and the up and down, the hills and ravines and whatever. This will be fairly flat, I would have thought, and quite easy to drive across if you really wanted to. But at the same time, it's quite open, so they can see you coming, and you are easy targets, right? So yeah, we can move really quickly, yeah, and they can see us from ages away and hit us really easily. So 6 of one, half dozen the other. But yeah, there you go. Just quite impressive satellite images. Just interesting colours and looking at how the waterways work there, and yeah, Zaporizhia and Dnipro River Delta. Yeah, okay. I shared part of this with you the other day. It's a big old Chris O wiki thread. It's an interesting one, and it's about this group here. Well, let's go through the whole lot. So half of the soldiers from the mobilized Leningrad regiment are said to have been killed fighting near Bakhmut. Survivors say they were given little equipment or ammunition and have been maltreated by incompetent officers who sent them into deadly positions. I mean, this is sort of account that we've heard so much about, and we've seen many of these, but it just seems endemic in the Russian armed forces. The regiment, formerly the 1486th Motor Rifle Regiment, is one of several that have been mostly recruited from St. Petersburg and the surrounding Leningrad Oblast. It comprises men mobilized from September 2022 onwards, plus volunteers. According to one of the regiment's members, a man called Dmitry, after mobilization, 1,700 men were sent for 2 months. That's more training, actually, than we've seen in other places, in other instances. 2 months to a military training camp in Privetinskoye, a village in the Vyborg district of the Leningrad Oblast. Now, he says, half are no longer alive. So that's 1,700, 850 dead. How many casualties? I mean, that's massively combat ineffective. That's huge losses. So when we talk about the losses that I report at the beginning of my first video every day and wonder how accurate they are, when we look at something like this, you're thinking, yeah, do you know what? We're hearing about this so often that they've got to be at least somewhat accurate, those numbers. Anyway, the men's problems began almost immediately. Dmitry said that at the very beginning in September, we were given one set of uniforms, a 20-kilogram modal bulletproof vest and an automatic rifle. In winter, we were given a homemade Belarusian VKPO all-season basic uniform, and 2 months ago, pants and socks. That's all, actually. The situation with ammunition was equally bad. Dmitry says that it was only issued twice, once on entry, that's September, and the second time 3 months ago. So this is like September last year, and that's going to be 9 months later. So, 8-9 months. They had no more ammunition. The men have had to rely on trophy ammunition captured from the Ukrainians. Dmitry says that small arms play no role at all in this war. If you remember, there was an article with Yuri Chernomorets, the theologian sniper, literally, and now he does fundraising for sniper kit. So go and check him out, Y_Chernomorets on YouTube, and help him get kit for those snipers on the front. And that's super important, because remember in that article with him, a Euromaidan article, they were talking, the article was talking about how 88% of all the deaths are as a result of artillery, 10% sniper, so that's 98% those two, and then 2% small arms and other things, right? In other words, artillery, but snipers. And in this discussion in the article was, even if there's a different thing going on, like a major counteroffensive or defensive or whatever, that would change those stats, it was always still artillery first, snipers second. Might be slightly different percentages. So snipers are hugely important, but the point here is that small arms fire kills relatively few people. And this is what it says here. Small arms play no role at all in this war. In winter, we received a DSHK machine gun on a base from 1943. Can you imagine the Maxim machine gun? Well, just like that, on wooden wheels. Now, we've seen Ukrainians use Maxims in a bunker, and you put a heavy machine gun like that, it's going to do a job, right? No matter how old it is. But I think this speaks to the lack of quality equipment for a lot of Russian forces here. And even that was without a firing pin. So old wooden wheels without a firing pin. The officers found a firing pin somewhere in Russia through their acquaintances and brought it back. They fixed it. We also had one short wheelbase Ural truck for a battalion of 550 men. So a machine gun from 1943 and one short wheelbase truck, 550 men. Everyone's food was bad. 1.5 boiled potatoes per soldier. That's probably normal, but it's not the worst problem. I mean, soldiers love to moan, right? It is their tradition. But, this seems to be particularly bad. According to Dmitry, although plentiful supplies were promised and appeared to be available, nothing reached the soldiers. Yes, supplies were brought in. At least the warehouses were full. I saw it myself. But why it didn't reach the soldiers is another question. We've seen this a lot. I reported at the beginning of the war, probably last July or something like that, how Russian, and this is the same for Ukrainians to a degree, like some of the best, apparently there are some like soldiers over the West who have really decent equipment. You're like, why hasn't that reached the front lines? It gets picked off as it goes forward. But this has been a real problem for the Russians right from the start, where there were these reports of like trucks of supplies coming in and then getting taken away by the rear, and then as it moves forward, more and more people take stuff. So by the time it got to the front, there's only one pallet of equipment. Well, they don't use pallets. One like bunch of boxes of supplies for the front line. And they're like, we're the ones doing the fighting and we're getting nothing. And then, to make matters worse, the stuff that the people took further behind the lines, they then sell to the front line on the black market. They take the best cigarettes and sell that to them, and take, ammunition or whatever. And you're like, hang on, we're the ones fighting and we're having to buy with our own money stuff that we're supposed to be provided by the MOD because you bastards are taking them. Yeah. According to Dmitry, although plentiful supplies were, the men were first deployed to Kupiansk in eastern Ukraine, then to Svatove. In May 2023, they were sent to Soledar, so that's north of Bakhmut. They fought around the Pakivska Reservoir near Bakhmut, then around the outskirts of the destroyed city itself, where they endured terrible conditions. In June 2023, soldiers from the regiment recorded a video describing the terrible conditions that they were experiencing, with little or no ammunition, food or water. The men were also not being rested or rotated, a problem we see. I mean, it's not exclusively the problem of the Russians. The Ukrainians do suffer from this as well in certain areas. But it's also not the case that all Russians suffer these. So you do have to be careful, like I keep saying, not to extrapolate this across all of the Russian forces. But it's definitely endemic. It is an issue within the Russian MOD, and I'm pretty sure I shared that complaint video with you before. Adding to the men's discontent, public promises of support from St. Petersburg politicians were never fulfilled, although were just faked. Local deputies stated that they had provided hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid, including vehicles, uniforms, binoculars and mine detectors. A delegation from St. Petersburg supposedly visited the war zone earlier this year. However, according to Larisa Lukina, the head of the relatives group, photographs from the deputies' trip were actually taken in Belgorod region of Russia and not in Ukraine. So they didn't visit the front line. They said they did, had a photo op, exchanged some medals and stuff, and said they'd given humanitarian aid, but hadn't. Dmitry says, quote, "We have never seen anyone from St. Petersburg administration on the front line. According to Lukina, the city leadership does not react in any way to numerous appeals from the wives and mothers of soldiers." The 1486th Regiment was used as a reserve for the 1307th Motor Rifle Regiment, which endured equally terrible conditions and huge casualties. The video below from early June illustrates what the soldiers of the 1307th were experiencing then, and I shared that one with you for sure. I remember that one. The 1486th then switched to supporting the 98th Airborne Division's 331st Airborne Regiment, who also suffered greatly. Seems to be a theme there. Dmitry says that the combat area, which was only about 0.6 square miles or 1.5 square kilometers in size, is littered with the unburied bodies of thousands of Russians. He says, quote, "The paratroopers shit themselves very badly, but formally they are still working there. Although, in fact, our regiment is there. This place, so you know, is not the most pleasant. A square of 1.5 by 1.5 kilometers in which almost 6,000 people are stacked." That's killed. 6,000 people dead in 1.5 square kilometers. Just from the last mobilized regiments. Nobody takes the 200s, the dead, out from there because there is simply nowhere to put them. Usually they were taken to Rostov, but now everything is overcrowded there. Now we have a respite, and only because of so-called storm units, so these are the penal units with either refuseniks or convicts, being sent to the very problematic place. These are some drunkards and refuseniks brought in from nowhere, so they gathered 100 military men and periodically throw them on assaults. So you can imagine these storm units are not particularly happy. They're probably not very well trained, former convicts getting thrown into suicidal attacks. So they don't really want to do what they're told. Anyway, the Leningrad regiment suffered from atrociously bad leadership during this time. A secretly recorded confrontation between men from the regiment and an officer was published in late June. And that is, Chriso Wiki has the recording there. The regiment's colonel, Evgeny Vashunin, was killed on the 14th of July. Dmitry strongly criticizes him for causing the deaths of many of the regiment's men. Another soldier suggests that Vashunin may have been deliberately killed by his own side. According to the soldier, when the storm units arrived, they were put in positions in front of Wagner troops, nicknamed the Musicians, who acted as a Stalin-style barrier unit to shoot retreating storm members, as well as providing a second line of defense. That's, quote, "That's why, although the Stormovites suffered constant losses and not small ones, they were afraid to leave their positions. But when the Musicians left, so when Wagner did a runner, and the Leningraders were pulled up to the rear of Storm, so this is his group are now becoming the kind of the barrier troops, the prisoners thought that they could rebel here. You know, they give a bit of a rebel yell. Crack into a bit of Billy Idol there. That day, the order came to make some noise. This is a name given to depicting some kind of vigorous activity, such as preparation for an offensive or reconnaissance in force. This is done, so it's a bit like the wild weasel, or you're kind of drawing out enemy fire. This is done so that the enemy reveals the positions of his artillery, which we can then attempt to hit with our long-range guns or drones. During such noisemakers, losses always occur, and therefore such orders are reluctantly carried out. This time, too, the stormtroopers simply refused to carry out the order, but Vashunin couldn't find anything better than to take a security platoon with him and go deal with the storm command. He was brought back on a tarpaulin. The official account has it that Vashunin was killed by a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group, but the soldier says that there was no offensive Ukrainian activity that day. The clear implication being that the stormtroopers killed him. They may have had good reason to do so, according to Dmitri's account. What was happening under him was utter rubbish. That is, the guys were driven without any combat mission just to be slaughtered in wooded areas. At first in platoons, then they realised that this was a lot, so they started to take 15 men each, and the plantation was only between 5 and 30 metres wide. That is, it was impossible to turn around. Under artillery, under heavy fire, the guys from the regiment were simply stacked up, killed. On the front line, he behaved as ignorantly as possible. By his own stupidity, he burned down a staging post, which is now constantly being hit by Ukrainian artillery, and we are suffering losses there. At some point, he just took the next people there. Before that, he asked on the radio, was everything calm? It was important for him to check in and show that he was in charge. He arrived in the dark in a car with a torch and lights on, and shells immediately flew there. We were lucky that this was a serious fortification, and it can't be destroyed just like that. Many men were injured, but Dmitri says they have effectively been left in a bureaucratic limbo by the Russian state. Quote, we have wounded men in our battalion who still can't get their injury payments. I mean, this is something we saw with Wagner. But even though they were Wagner and not MOD fighters, they were still paid at base by the Russian MOD. Like, if you don't look after these soldiers, you are going to have wives and family members. These guys talk to their families still, but it's difficult. They still do on occasion. And that gives a sense of discontent throughout the general population because, you know, there are a lot of soldiers being sent down to the front lines, and that's probably a lot of unhappy soldiers now with unhappy wives and family members. Anyway, when they go on leave, they don't even have a combat veteran certificate in their hands, and they can't go to any medical institution because, as the law stipulates, because according to the documents, as they say, we were not there. Things are not well, are they, in a lot of the Russian forces? I just included this because, you know, I talk so often about equipment losses and big old pieces of mechanized equipment getting lost on a daily basis. How do we understand those figures? Are they accurate? And then I think, well, the United 24, the Army of Drones, had raised $350 million, and they had 10,000 trained drone operators and an absolute bucket load of drones, right? And I was saying these are going to be really important on the front line. If you remember, if you go back months before the counteroffensive, I was like, there's going to be a lot of drone activity, and this will make a huge difference. And actually, I think that is what's happening. So I think when you're seeing 120 pieces of equipment lost yesterday, that's a phenomenal number. 47 cars, trucks, vehicles and fuel tanks. What is it? 23 APVs, 23 tanks, and 37 pieces of artillery. That's phenomenal, right? How can you explain this? My answer is first-person view drones. These bad boys are being sent all over the shop. And here we've got just 2 trucks being taken out by first-person view drones. And that is, yeah, I mean, it's pretty standard footage, whatever you might say. But this kind of footage is 10 a penny. So much of this footage is coming out. And you add it all up and you start getting significant losses. And it must have a psychological effect, as I've talked to you about before. These people must be listening and watching out the whole time for drones because it's just a consistent threat. And even sometimes you see these vehicles drive down a track and then they see a drone and they've spotted it and they know they're being chased. And sometimes you see the vehicle stop and people get out and a drone hits a vehicle. They're thinking, well, rather the vehicle than me, and these things can fly pretty quickly, and they're pretty good. You know, when you're doing this all day, every day, drone operators, you're going to get pretty good at it. And then we saw that one the other day where they stopped, and they were by that 4x4. They stopped, got out. Two guys have got out. The drone, they got out on one side of the vehicle, and the drone went to that side of the vehicle, so they ran around the other side, and it came up and went the other side, and they thought, oh my goodness, we need to do a runner. And so they ran away, but they ran it, unfortunately for them, they ran together rather than going off in separate directions. And the drone, rather than take out the vehicle, took them out. And it just must be, really scary. But anyway, just wanted to say a little thing about drones there. Now, this is a piece of kit I hadn't seen before. This is a Bozena 5. It's a remote mining, a Slovak remote mining vehicle. I mean, a bit of a combine harvester there by the looks of it. But no, we're talking a long time. We've talked about what Ukraine needs to do in order to demine their country. It's the most heavily mined country in the world, right? And many people have talked about autonomous or remote-controlled mining vehicles, and here's one of them. This is, I never heard of it. It's a Slovak-originated demining vehicle used to counter anti-vehicle and anti-personnel mines. It's operated by a two-person crew via remote control. Special training is required. Batteries not included. Keeping the operators at safe distance from the danger zone. Weighing around 10,000 kilograms, it can be carried on the back of a light-class low-bed trailer or similar tow system arrangement, and relatively compact size makes it air transportable in the back of a Hercules or similar fixed-wing aircraft. Bozena deminer is marketed with qualities such as ease of operation, ease of maintenance, and good general survivability against AVs and AP mines, although it's more susceptible to structural damage in the former and lesser in the latter. So in other words, an anti-tank mine is going to cause a bit of problem for this roller. Now, these rollers, as we've seen on other types of kit, will sustain a number of explosions from anti-tank mines. But at the end of the day, anti-vehicles or anti-tank mines are designed to take out a tank, right? So they can do some damage. And these things aren't magic, so you have to be able to maintain these and have spare parts for them to put the rigs back on and get them moving again. But yeah, loads of these are going to be needed, really. Lots and lots. All right, I'm going to go to Alexei Reznikov, the former defense minister for Ukraine. Now, not so. What are we doing for time? Okay. So he's now written an article in The Guardian. It says, I was Ukraine's defense minister. Here's my message for our allies. We must not lose sight of victory. And he says, I would like to thank my fellow ministers of defense. You are the people writing a new page in the world's history. It is thanks to you that Ukraine is able to face Russian aggression with dignity. We will never forget those who lent a hand in the most terrible time of our history. But I would also like to make several important points for my defense colleagues. The objective of the civilized world must be to stop Russia. He says, you have to realize, these defense ministers, you have to realize that you are responsible for the entire future of humanity. I love this rhetoric. Imagine like Grant Shapps, like UK Secretary of Defense, has just come in, taken a new job. Ben Wallace has gone, right, okay, Monday, I'm in. Right, so he goes to his PA, says, right, what's on the agenda for today? Okay, the agenda, Grant, let's see. Number one, by the end of the day today, you have to have secured the entire future of humanity because you're responsible for the entire future of humanity. And he's like, oh, really? Oh, okay, right. That's a big job. There's a lot of big rhetoric, but arguably, well, as we got to see, pretty much, yeah. That is why it's vital that you act decisively. Russia and its partners have challenged not just the independence and sovereignty of one European country, but the entire world order, including international law and humanitarian and security institutions. Whether the civilized world will be able to avert a third world war will depend on its response to Russia's actions and how the war in Ukraine ends. Russia won't be stopped by freezing the conflict, an armistice, or concessions. Right. This is super important, and I love what he does here. In 1938, striving to prevent what would become the Second World War, and an infamous agreement was signed in Munich, transferring the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia to the Third Reich. Let's look at this. This is so important. I've mentioned this before, but I think I've only mentioned it once or twice. And actually, it is so relevant. What happened is Czechoslovakia was kind of carved up by allies, and some of it was given to Sudetenland was given to Germany in the hope that it would appease them and they wouldn't carry on with the war. Except they just said thank you very much, and now we're going to have the rest. In other words, it was blatant appeasement from third-party nations, and it didn't work. So let's have a quick look at that. So this is the Encyclopedia Britannica. Let's read through that. So the Munich Agreement in September 30th, 1938. A settlement reached by Germany, Great Britain, France and Italy that permitted German annexation of the Sudetenland in Western Czechoslovakia. Just like German, Great Britain, France and Italy. Right, okay, guys. So we're going to talk about carving up Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia is like, guys, Czechoslovakia here. Just wondering if we get a say in, you guys helping yourself to my body here. Just you guys are going to chop me up. Everyone else is like, Czechoslovakia, boys are talking now. The adult conversation, stay over there. Anyway, guys, no, shh. It's enough. It's enough, Czechoslovakia. It's enough. So anyway, Germany, Hitler. You want a piece of that? Yeah. No, we're fine with giving you that. You're not gonna have Hampshire and Kent. They're in England. You ain't having that. But Sudetenland, no problem. You can have that any day of the week. After his success in absorbing Austria into Germany proper in March 1938, Adolf Hitler looked covetously at Czechoslovakia, where about 3 million people in the Sudetenland were of German origin. Sounds a bit like Crimea, Donbass, people of Russian-speaking origin. We see some parallels here. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I don't know. This looks pretty exactly repeated. In April, he discussed with Wilhelm Keitel, the head of the German Armed Forces High Command, the political and military aspects of Case Green, the code name for the envisaged takeover of the Sudetenland. A surprise onslaught out of a clear sky without any causal possibility of justification was rejected, because the result would have been a hostile world opinion that could lead to a critical situation. Right, now let's transfer that to Donbass and Crimea. We can't invade Donbass and Crimea, so we have to do some stirring of poking of hornets' nests and getting involved and sending some people underground to cause a bit of a ruckus, and then a few years later, we'll send in the little green men. We'll do the invasion. And then some years later, a proper invasion. And this is just what was going on here. Absolutely incredible. So decisive action, therefore, would take place only after a period of political agitation by the Germans inside Czechoslovakia. So getting the pro-Russian Ukrainians to stir up, also getting in some Russians into there to pretend to be pro-Russian Ukrainians. Political agitation by Germans inside Czechoslovakia, accompanied by diplomatic squabbling, which, as it grew more serious, would either itself build up to an excuse for war or produce the occasion for a lightning offensive after some incident of German creation. Moreover, disruptive political activities inside Czechoslovakia had been underway since as early as October 1933, when Konrad Heinlein founded the Sudetendeutsche Heimatfront, Sudeten German Home Front. It's just incredible. In May 1938, it was known that Hitler and his generals were drawing up a plan for the occupation of Czechoslovakia. The Czechoslovaks were relying on military assistance from France, with which they had an alliance. Sounds rather like the Budapest Memorandum to me. Hey, we've got a deal with you guys to help us out. Yeah, except this time, no, we did actually come to help Ukraine. And that's why it's so important not to go down this route, not to go down this appeasement route, because this is what happened. But certainly what happened before. Soviet Union had a treaty with Czechoslovakia, and it indicated willingness to cooperate with France and Great Britain if they decided to come to Czechoslovakia's defence. But the Soviet Union and its potential services were ignored throughout the crisis. As Hitler continued to make inflammatory speeches demanding that the Germans in Czechoslovakia be reunited with their homeland, war seemed imminent. Neither France nor Britain felt prepared to defend Czechoslovakia, however, and both were anxious to avoid a military confrontation with Germany at almost any cost. Sound familiar? Oh, escalation. Oh. In France, a Popular Front government had come to an end, and on April the 8th, 1938, Edouard Daladier formed a new cabinet without socialist participation or communist support. 4 days later, Le Temps, whose foreign policy was controlled by the Foreign Ministry, published an article by Joseph Barthélemy, professor of Paris Law Faculty, in which he scrutinized the Franco-Czechoslovak Treaty of Alliance of 1924 and concluded that France was not under obligation to go to war in order to save Czechoslovakia. It's a bit like the Budapest Memorandum. It turns out that it's an assurance, it's not a guarantee. So actually, although, as I say, we have come to the assistance of Ukraine. Earlier on March the 22nd, the Times of London had stated in a leading article by its editor, G.G. Dawson, that Great Britain would not undertake war to preserve Czech sovereignty over the Sudeten Germans without first clearly ascertaining the latter's wishes. Otherwise, Great Britain might well be fighting against the principle of self-determination. And of course, with the referendums that took place in Crimea and Donbass, they weren't free and fair referendums. They were completely corrupt, and the opinions, the conclusions were false. But of course, you know, those who want to refer to those referendums are, you know, to argue for Russia keeping hold of those places because it aligns with the popular, the prevailing desires of those populations, are just playing into Russia's hand. And Russia had constructed those referendums such that they had those conclusions, and it would be wrong to give them any time of day, really. So on and so forth. I mean, really very interesting. And it's just, you know, we tried that appeasement thing. We carved up a country that wasn't ours. We gave it to Hitler, and he said, "Thank you very much, and I'm going to have the rest." And then I'm going to go on and on and on. And if we go through that, go down that appeasement route today, then it will end in tears for Ukraine and for all of us. And this is what Reznikov is saying. He's absolutely right. We know from history that this did not stop Hitler. Soon the Third Reich had complete control over what was left of Czechoslovakia, including its considerable military arsenal, which later played an important role in the invasion of Poland and France. Putin's actions follow a similar pattern. Russia demands a recognition of the occupied territories of Ukraine as its territory in exchange for the end of the war. However, this is obviously for the sake of one thing only: to buy some time, regroup, and finally solve the Ukrainian issue using new resources. Russia does not recognize the existence of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Its goal is the destruction of Ukrainian statehood and the assimilation of Ukrainians. Its ambitions will not stop at Ukraine. I believe that letting Russians obtain Ukraine's resources, including a large recruiting fund, will only increase the Kremlin's ambitions to lead a big new war in Eastern Europe, which will inevitably involve NATO with all the resulting risks. And he goes on, and there's lots more to say, but just, you know, Russian war criminals must face justice, yes. But I like the ending. Finally, I would like to ask you to be even more responsive and supportive to my successor. Rustem Umarov is a competent and professional person capable of continuing the initiatives we have launched. Together, you will accelerate the moment of Ukraine's victory. So it's very supportive of the person who's taking over, and I think that's super important there. How I've been talking for way too long, haven't I? So just to, I guess, finish off here, I mentioned Elon Musk. I don't really want to go down that route again, but everyone's talking about him on the socials. All the big analysts, all the big reporters. This is really big news. Michael Weiss here saying, indeed, and he routinely defers for geopolitical analysis to a consortium of grifters and pro-Russian cranks on the website he now owns. So in other words, Elon Musk goes for advice to the wrong people. And I mean, here's a great example. He's absolutely right here. So this is, you know, here's some pro-Russian propaganda using a known pro-Russia propaganda account. You promoted that lie almost, that almost 3,000 NATO soldiers had been killed in Ukraine. I mean, this is literally Elon Musk said that the Russian market, right, it was pro-Russian propaganda saying that 2,458 NATO soldiers from Germany, Poland, and Lithuania had died, and 234 NATO military trainers from the US and UK had died in this war. Okay, back in whenever this was, February 2023, right? Actually, this is a year into the war. That claim, which is absolutely bonkers, right? It's a bonkers claim. No one believes that, except Elon Musk believed it. A tragic loss of life. But they didn't die. 3,000 NATO personnel did not die in this war, you plonker. And so garbage in, garbage out. So the most powerful man in the world gets given a bunch of information, or takes on information that is obscenely wrong. Then he's going to make bad garbage in, garbage out. He's going to make bad decisions, but he's supremely powerful. So those bad decisions have massive impact. And then, right, and I'm not going to go through this, but I mentioned this guy in my last couple of videos, right? And it's funny how, you know, it's all kind of connected, and people understand that these people are wrong uns, right? So this is Ian Miles Chong, and I said he's a bad man, but Musk likes him, right? And lo and behold, I didn't realize this, but is reposted today, Pekka Kaloniemi, who does Vacnick Soup. So every so often he does a big thread and he analyzes a person or a thing, and he says, you know, this is wrong or this bad or whatever. And he does a whole thread. I'm not going to go through it, but he does a whole thread on this chap. Ian Miles Chung, and he is an absolute wrong'un. He started off as a completely different person, as a gamer, as a Reddit moderator before he was sacked from that, and then he was a gamer, and he did have a job writing for a few places on like the tech industry, but then that went wrong for him, and he basically then he was anti-Russia, and then he switched. Like, so what happens with the internet, sadly, is that it drives people to the extreme because people like extremes, and it's clickbait. And so, you know, this person is being driven to the extreme by having a really avid following, and now he's a massive influencer who is completely pro-Russian, and he's gone against all the stuff that he was originally for, probably just following the money, and now he's in bed with all these kind of nuts theories, and he's a wrong'un, right? And this thread is really, really interesting. I mean, it's a big old thread, so you probably don't want me to bore you with it, but actually the last sort of 10 of these are directly to do with Ukraine, and spouting pro-Russian talking points that have influence, right? And again, the theory is that he possibly influenced Elon Musk to turn off Starlink. And if that's the case, this person shouldn't have that influence. It's not right. You know, and as you know, Phillips O'Brien's arguing with him today, as you know, he's defending Ian Miles Chong is defending Musk's decision. He would have definitely shortened the war had it escalated to nuclear levels. Phillips O'Brien, think about it for a moment. Ukrainians sink the Moskva, flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, no escalation. Ukrainians regularly attack Kerch Bridge, no escalation. Ukrainians regularly attack around Crimea, no escalation. Ukrainians regularly attack Moscow, no escalation. You are just making things up. This escalation argument is not a good one, because it is is an attempt to stop people helping Ukraine, and it hasn't been true yet. Russia have been using everything bar nuclear since the beginning of this war, pretty much. And every time we reach that red line, whether it be M777 howitzers, javelins, and stingers, and then, you know, tanks and this and that, and jets now, is like, oh, don't do that. Oh, you know what happened? Okay, what happened? Oh, it turns out nothing. So actually, there ain't no escalation there. And that's what Phillips O'Brien is saying. So if you ever come across Ian Miles Chong, no. Anyway, that's enough of that. You don't want to hear any more about that, I'm sure. The last thing I'm going to mention is this, just because it's totally random. I'm not going to show this because I'll probably get restricted or whatever. So it's some guy firing in the trenches, doing some close combat. And the description of this is Ukrainian ambush on Russian positions by Eco-Platform militants. Eco-Platform is a Ukrainian green anarchist movement now fighting on the front lines. Like, what? What's going on here? Ecological anarchists fighting. And do you know what? There's all sorts. There's a left-wing hooligan group that are fighting on the front line, who are an anti-fascist football hooligans. They've got quite a lot of traction. They're quite famous. And here we've got eco-anarchists. And so I just had a little look into them. And actually, there's an interview with them here. And it's quite interesting. They're just like saying what they're all about. And actually, they get on really well with others. But yeah, it must be odd being anarchists in a very hierarchical organisation like the army. It's like, you need to do this and you need to do it now. No, anarchy. I don't know how that works. But cool. Everyone contributes and does their bit. Awesome stuff. So, I just thought that was a bit funky, a bit weird. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And thank you to Smith, who I didn't have on my members list because I'd accidentally lost them off there. And so sorry. Thank you to all my members. You are all totally cool. And thank you to other people who have been supporting as well. So please allow me to give thanks to Mikey from Cambridge, Lee Wakelin, Alexander Horner, Really appreciate all of your support. Peter Smith, Gary Knapp, Gary Utamola, Mark Bijq, Nick Horwood. Really, really do appreciate your support. Anyway, thanks everybody. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.